My guest at this time is Dr. Joshua Mansour. He's an oncologist and hematologist at Stanford University. He joins me today to discuss recent reports that researchers in Israel believe they will have a cure for cancer within a year. So how optimistic should we be about this right now? How is this approach to fighting cancer different than all the others we've seen in the past? And how soon could human patients have access to it? And Dr. Mansour, thank you very much for your time today.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
So the researchers in Israel say they're taking a different approach here. They're attacking cancer cells with peptides instead of proteins, and they're sending more attackers at these cancer cells than previous treatments. So break it down as best you can in layman's terms about what the plan of attack is here.
Sure. So these peptides are going to be smaller than your average protein, which will allow them to penetrate the barriers a little bit better. Along with these, the way that they're going about this is they want these peptides to target different series of the cells. So with cancer cells, when they evolve and they mutate, there are several different ways they can do that and several different targets that can be mutated. So the goal that they are trying to achieve is to target them at a multitude of different manners. How optimistic am I about it? I'm optimistic that they can target different barriers, but how soon they'll be able to do that, as well as which targets they'll be able to achieve, is the part that we're all pretty wary about.
Are you surprised that they had that bold of a prediction?
I think it's an incredibly bold prediction. I think everyone would love to see something like that happen, but the time frame is just a little bit too short. For something to even go through all the phases of clinical trials and to get approved usually takes on average about 10 to 15 years. So for something to be in a mice model right now, which they say that they have data but haven't been able to show the actual data or support for it yet, to then go to being approved and being, quote unquote, the cure for cancer in 1 year, I think is tough. The other thing I'd like to point out is there are hundreds of different types of cancers. Well, what they want to achieve is to penetrate the barriers, target different mutations, target different cell pathways. These can continue to evolve and evolve differently in each of those different cancers.
So let's break it down in a couple different ways. First of all,
sure.
If you get excellent results in mice experiments, how well does that generally translate to humans?
It doesn't always translate very well to humans, unfortunately. There have been several different testing that's occurred in animal species that have been approved for administration in phase 1 clinical trials, but then actually haven't made it that far. It's tougher than you would believe. Just because something is shown to work and to benefit in one particular type of species doesn't mean that'll translate over to a different type.
What data would you like to see? You say they haven't shared it yet. What would you be looking for when they do?
So going through their websites and some of their charts, the only thing that we could see are a couple different graphs. I'd like to see a lot more information on what cells were used, what targets in particular were affected by these peptides. I would just need some more concrete evidence for all of that.
What is a peptide?
So a peptide is an amino acid series of about 12 amino acids. Amino acids make up different parts of your body and cells, and that is about the size of a peptide, which is a lot smaller than a protein.
So if you see what you would consider encouraging evidence in the data on mice experiments, what's the next hurdle? What's the next hurdle after that, or series of hurdles even?
The next series of hurdles would be proving the efficacy in the mice, then translating over that to a phase 1 clinical trial in humans. In that phase 1 clinical trial, then they would test for safety and somewhat for efficacy and dosage. Then you would move on to phase 2 trials, where you're focusing on toxicity. Phase 3 would then be the efficacy of how well it works and how it treats the cancers. And then 4 would be outweighing the benefits from each of these phases and the risks and taking it and moving it forward.
What do you see as the best way to move forward here for other researchers? Do you recommend trying to figure out what they're going after? Are there other avenues that you think are just as promising? How would you encourage other researchers to proceed here?
Sure. So I think right now what's been great in the field is the use of combination modality, which is similar to what they would want to do, also attacking different targets and pathways. But right now, using combined therapies seems to benefit patients the most. For example, in lung cancers and GI cancers, we're using multiple different types of chemotherapies in each regimen so that they can attack each different part of the cell. By doing that, we're hoping that even if a cell mutates somewhat in one area, that one of the other meds will kind of take over to help attack that cancer cell. There's also some new evidence with other targeted therapies in leukemias and in lymphomas. Most recently, also we have CAR T cell therapy, which has really come about and made waves in the last couple of years. And this is where it's a chimeric antigen receptor therapy. So what it is basically treatment in which you have genetically engineered T cells are altered and express an artificial receptor or a CAR to then go in and attack your cancer cells. So there are a lot of new things on the rise right now that I think have a little bit more data to support them right now than this therapy.
One of the other things that was exciting in this possibility of a cancer cure, as mentioned by the folks in Israel, is that not only are they confident, at least at this point, that it would be effective against virtually every type of cancer, but that the treatment would be much less taxing on patients, and that it would essentially be relatively short, and you wouldn't have nearly the type of side effects that you typically have with chemotherapy. So what's your reaction to that claim?
Absolutely, and I think that's great. I think watching patients go through the chemotherapy and the side effects that they face is one of the biggest things that all physicians would hope to avoid. The reason also, based on their premise, is that they said, well, we're going to be attacking different targets of the cells that are more specific to the cancer cells. While in theory it sounds very promising, it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually put forward. A lot of the cells have the same types of receptors, are capable of the same types of mutations. So you would specifically have to know which cancer cell you were targeting and go after that. That, like I said, is a lot more difficult than you would think.
Well, Dr. Mansour, exit question here, whether it's the treatments you've been more familiar with over time or what you're seeing in Israel, your general level of optimism going forward about effective treatments, if not cures, treatments for cancer in general, or is that too general of a question?
No, it's not. My optimism, I'm very optimistic. I think most recently, especially at the world conferences and everything else that we can see, is that things are getting approved at a very substantial rate. By the time you think you know one thing and what the next best treatment is, a few months later, it's actually something else. So one thing that we're consistently doing is reading all the new data, all the new journals that are coming out, going through the different guidelines, making sure that when we see a patient that we are using the most up-to-date information and the most up-to-date treatments that are possible. And it is going right now at a very alarming speed, which makes, I think, everyone in the field, not only physicians, nurses, but also the patients, very happy to see.
Well, we would certainly love to see that, and we're encouraged by your optimism as well. Dr. Joshua Mansour is an oncologist and hematologist at Stanford University. I'm Greg Corombos, reporting for Radio America.